some 10 or 12 years ago, one of the first times that I'd actually spoke, it was at Glendale Road actually, and right before the lesson, Johnny Dale came down there and gave me a card. I opened up the card and I'm sure it had something very profound written in it, but all I remember is that it had a $100 bill in it. So I've got a jar set up in the back. It's big enough for cards, and it's plenty big enough for large bills. But nonetheless, I'm so thankful to be here this evening. We have a good set of elders. We have a set of elders that knows that I'm not going to put myself in this camp, but that we've got some men here that can get up here and do this, that we've got some people that are willing. And I think it's very, very important that every time that we need somebody to preach is that we look within first. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to get up here with you this evening. I don't have a real great PowerPoint tonight, and I'm not a very dynamic speaker. But something that I do know from growing up in the church, that there's two things that make everybody in the Church of Christ happy. One is a potluck. And by this point in the service, we'd already be smelling the rolls heating up downstairs. So I'm sorry to disappoint. Unless I don't know about it, there's no potluck. The second thing that they like is a short sermon. So I can promise you that you're going to leave here today happy. I was walking down the aisle, and Mr. Don Cates said, if you don't hurry up and get done, as he was pulling out his pocket knife, he was going to come deal with me. So this evening, we'll make sure that we get done in time. You know, when we're young, our dads can do anything. They're the bravest people we know. They're the smartest people we know. They're the most courageous people that we know. When we get into our adolescent years and our teenage years, our dads are so out of touch. We're so much smarter than they are. They have no idea what we're going through, and we really just don't want to listen to them. When we get into our 20s, we start thinking, well, Dad probably had a good idea every once in a while. There was a thing or two that he said that was actually true. Maybe he did know what he was talking about just that one time. Then you get into your late 20s and your early 30s, and you pretty well realize that your dad, it goes full circle, is the smartest person that you know. There's not very many times that I make an important decision, I undertake any home project, or start to build anything before I consult with my dad. And actually, at this point, I'll talk to him and I'll talk to Rick. Mostly because I've done it the other way before and I end up breaking something. But the beauty there is that something is usually one of theirs. So, nonetheless, it actually pays for them, for me to come and ask them. I was talking to a preacher friend of mine the other day in Mayfield, and he said, you know what, we tend to love on our mothers on Mother's Day and really rail on our fathers on Father's Day. You know, that's something that we want to be cognizant of and we don't want to do. But I think it's important if we take a look at some of our responsibilities that we have as fathers. I've been very, very, very richly blessed in my life to have several people that supplement that role of my dad. I've never thought of my Uncle Mark as a uncle, but as an extension of my father. Later in my life, I met Todd Walker, who I have talked about from this very pulpit, who became a father to me. And from the first day that I even took Ricky Lynn out on a date, Rick Moody became a daddy to me. And quite honestly, for quite a bit of our time that we were dating, Rick and I were probably closer, better friends than Ricky Lynn and I were. So it's good to have those people in your life. These folks continue to mold and continue to shape me into the person that I am today. But unfortunately, there's a lot of folks that don't have that. They've never experienced those relationships, and they're not blessed with that. The solace that we find in that is every single one of us does have a Father who loves us more than any other man could ever love us on this earth. This evening, I want us to look at a couple of people that will show us some good examples of father and son and parent and child relationships. Let's think back to the first human father, Adam. Now, sometimes we'll hear people saying things when we're talking about a child who's always in trouble, or someone that is older that doesn't treat women with the respect that they deserve, or something of that nature. And they'll say, well, you know what? He's not a good person, but he never had a daddy. He never had anybody to show him the way that he needed to be. Adam was unable to use that as an excuse. The example of a father was directly that of God. And even with that example, he did a very poor job at a few critical points in his life of being a good leader. And with faltering at being a steadfast husband and parent, he suffered great pain as sin entered into the world and as Cain killed Abel. Consider Noah. This was a man that, in spite of the wicked world in which he lived in, was a very, very protective father. This was someone who led by example. This was someone who had a positive influence, and it ultimately led to saving the lives of his family. And at this point in my life, I'm very sensitive to the influence in which I have, the influence in which my daughter is going to follow. It's not a question of if or when we're going to influence our children. It's 100% a fact that we have the decision on how we're going to do that, but it's going to happen. The list of these men goes on and on and on. Job and Abraham and Isaac and et cetera, of all these men who had some really good attributes, and then some had some bad attributes. But what I'm led to believe is that if God continues to give us example after example after example of things in the Bible, examples of good fathers and bad fathers, examples of how to lead our children, examples of how to be stewards of our money, examples of how to love. I'm not real smart, but if he keeps talking about that, I'm guessing that it's important. I'm guessing it's something that we should probably take note of. So that's what I'd like to do this evening, is think about how we're going to influence our children. In the opening of the book of Joshua, God is constantly telling Joshua to be a man of great courage. To be a man of great courage. He was getting this torch, so to speak, being passed from him or to him. And in Joshua 24, verse 15 at the end, he says, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Let me ask you a quick question. Do you think that Joshua's kids had any doubt in their mind of which direction in which they were headed? Do our kids ever question which direction that we're headed? Sometimes as fathers and parents, we send mixed messages. Emery will be playing with the light receptacles, and one time I'll go over there and spat her leg, and she'll cry. The next 5 minutes later, she'll do it again. And I'll run over there, and she'll grin at me, and I'll scoop her up, and I'll kiss her, and I'll hug on her. And I can't help it. She's the cutest thing that ever was created. But in all seriousness, she really is the cutest baby ever created. But what are the things that I'm telling her when I tell her no one time and I love on her the next? We got to be careful about the message that we're sending. Kids a lot of times will see their parents on fire for the Lord. They'll be there 3 times a week. They'll be active in FIA. they'll be hosting devos at their house, and then the next week they're making excuses of why we're not attending on Sunday or Wednesday night. That wasn't Joshua. And friends, that wasn't courage. Think about what God said about Abraham in Genesis 18, beginning in verse 19. We read, "For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord." God said, this one thing that I know about Abraham, I know that he's going to be a good father. I know that he's going to be a leader. He knew that he would lead his kids in the way of the Lord. Could people, or could God say that about us? I know that man is a good father. I know, without a shadow of a doubt, he is going to lead them in my way. The first way that we need to direct our kids is in the things that we say. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 7, and we see these words, "Which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk about them when you sit down in your house, when you walk along the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." Spiritual training happens each and every day. One of our jobs is to look for every teachable moment that we can and exploit that for the good of the Lord. It's unfortunate that even though we're declining in the amount of dual parent households, even the ones that we still have today, how many of those are both parents actually really present in the lives of their kids? Are we talking about meaningful things? Are we talking about spiritual things? Or are we simply critiquing their swing? Are we instructing on how to make that jump shot? Are we talking about their grades in school? All of these things are important, and I can appreciate them all. But what are we talking about when we're sitting down at the table at night? Are we sitting down at the table at night? Are we taking the opportunities to talk about Jesus when they get up and they go to school in the morning? How many teachable moments are we taking advantage of? If your kids grew up to be just like you, would that be somebody that you would be proud of? Would people be able to see Jesus in them? Now that is a very, very sobering question as a daddy. I think something that's even more sobering is that one day Philip Brown will give an account of how he instructed his daughter. Did I take the opportunities to be a daddy to her? Did I take the opportunities to teach her? In 1 Samuel chapter 3, 11 through 14, "Then the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which 2 ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli, and that I have spoken concerning his house from the beginning to the end. And I declare to him that I am about to," listen to this, "punish his house forever for the iniquity he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned by sacrifice or offering forever." Guys, being a parent is a big deal. It's something that we need to take very, very, very seriously, because one of these days, not only is the direction in which we lead our kids going to directly impact them, but quite frankly, it's going to impact us as well. Good parents have bad kids sometimes, and bad parents end up having good kids. But I think that we need to make sure that we're focusing on doing the little things right, regardless of the trajectory of our kids. A preacher visited a child's Sunday school class one time, and he asked one of the little boys, he said, "Why do you believe in God?" The little boy, just without missing a beat, said, "I guess it just runs in my family." So I think that's something that we need to be asking ourselves. as cute and funny as that might be at times, does believing in God, does the love of Jesus run in our family? That starts with us. Next, the direction of fatherhood is not just in the things that we say, but more importantly, it's in the things that we do. Listen, the religion of our kids is not going to hinge near as much on what we say as what they see us do, as what we show them. It's very, very, very true, folks, that my daughter is not listening near as much to the things that I say as watching the things that I do. And a child is not likely to find God unless they find God in their father. And I think that's very important, because the perception that our kids have of our Heavenly Father really has a lot to do with the perception that they have of their earthly father early on. Ricky Lynn often asks me when she gets frustrated with me, which is about every half hour or so, why don't you hire anybody to come over here and finish this shop? Why don't you get somebody to fix this? Why do you feel like you've got to do it? And I'll say something, and ultimately it all comes back down to, well, that's the way Daddy did it. And isn't that the way that it really is? Kids are saying, Daddy, I don't always know why, and quite frankly, I don't always need to. I'm just going to do the things that you do. Now, that's a lot of responsibility when somebody says, I don't know why you're doing it that way, but that's the way I'm going to do it. That's important. And as parents, we truly hurt when our kids hurt. It was probably about a year ago. My mother was keeping Emery one day when she was off work. And I don't eat lunch very much, and I certainly don't eat a good hot lunch very much. So Mama made dinner, and I came over about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were sitting there talking in the kitchen. And Emery was in the living room. I heard her drink hit the floor, and I went in there to check on her. And I saw this little bitty spot of juice or milk or something on the floor, which wasn't a big deal. I was going to go clean it up. But when I stooped down there to pick her up, the bottom of my dress shoe found the much larger spot of milk that she had spilled on the floor first. And in an instant, my foot slipped out from under me, and I kicked my kid square in the eye. It bled and everything, and my Aunt Lydia, I think, even came over, and I was laying on the floor in the fetal position. I just felt awful. And, that goes full circle, too. That I could even see that my mom was hurting because I was hurting. And I think often that we believe that God is a lot bigger than that He doesn't have those feelings, that He doesn't feel that way. But I think the reality of it is that He probably did. He on the night of Jesus' betrayal, He listened to him. He listened to his son beg and say, Dad, I don't want to do this. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to go through this pain. I don't want to be spat on. I don't want to be whipped. I don't want to be hung on that cross. Take it away from me. Is there something that you can do to fix this? Daddy, help me. Of course, it doesn't say it in those words, but just think about that. Think about what he was saying to him. Don't you think that it hurt God's feelings to see his kid down there being hurt and abused and taken advantage of? As much as I love everybody sitting here, if it comes down to Emery or you, I'm sorry, but you are losing every single time. But he was bigger than that. He said that, son, this is the way that it has to be. And to give them hope, you've got to do this. And despite all of that, he allowed those horrible things to happen to him so that we could have that hope. I really never thought of the heartache that he must have experienced until I became a father myself. I really never recognized a lot of things until I came a father myself. But when we found out we were pregnant, or when Ricky Lynn found out she was pregnant, a friend of mine in Jackson named Rayvo Dunn said, "Philip, you're about to understand so much better the love of Jesus Christ." And I didn't get that. Probably didn't get that until 3 or 4 months after she was here. And the part I love about that is, as much as I love her, He loves me so much more. So, on a day such as this, the greatest gift that we can give our dad isn't a tie. It isn't a new fishing pole. It isn't a handmade card. It's living a life that's full of Jesus. And I think that we need to appreciate that. One day, a man decided to quit his life. He was just tired. He was upset. So he quit his job. He quit his relationship. He quit his spirituality. And he wanted to quit his life. So he went into the woods one final time to have a conversation with God. He said, "God, if you can give me one good reason why not to quit, I won't." And God simply replied and said, "Do you see the fern and the bamboo?" He said, "Yes, I see the fern and the bamboo." He said, "The first time that I took the fern seed and the bamboo seed, I planted it and I gave it water and I gave it light. I gave it everything that it needed. In the first year, the fern began to flourish, but nothing came of the bamboo. In the second year, the fern grew more vibrant than it had the first year, but again, nothing from the bamboo. And in the third and in the fourth years, the same happened till this fern was just taking over the floor of the woods, but still nothing from the bamboo. In the fifth year, we see a little sprout that came from the bamboo seed. And in comparison to the fern, it was nothing but a small weed that could be plucked between your thumb and your index finger. But in just 6 months, that bamboo grew over 100 feet tall. See, it had spent 5 years simply growing roots, knowing that God wouldn't give these creations anything more than they could handle. He said again to this man, "Do you understand that even though you've been struggling, what you've been doing is you've been growing roots?" He said, "I'll never quit on you. All you have to do is keep doing what you're doing." And when we think about it, a happy and meaningful life requires constant inputs, constant creativity. A meaningful journey as a parent and as a father also requires constant inputs, even though it seems like we might not be reaping anything from it. It doesn't happen by chance. It's going to happen by our actions. So each day, let's think about doing the small things right consistently, making sure that we are growing roots in our kids. Even though we might not be able to see those roots this year or next year or maybe even in a decade, the beauty is that if we do the small things right, we're growing roots in our kids. And I'm sure there will come a time that I ask myself, am I doing a good job at being a dad? I'm sure there's plenty of people here that have probably asked themselves that question too. When I took the end of my shoe into the face of my kid, I knew the answer to that question that day. But I hope that consistently we're making progress at being a better parent. Young people that aren't married, I think this still applies to you. The roots that you're growing today are going to directly impact the lives and the salvation of your future family. Continue to grow your roots. I was rabbit hunting one day a couple of years ago, and one of the gentlemen that was with us, after we found out Emery was coming, said, "Philip, here's one thing that I can promise you. I can promise you that this little girl will be your greatest accomplishment." And I believe there's a lot of truth to that. But as we think about being a father and leading our kid in the direction which they need to go and doing those little things right on a consistent basis, I think my greatest accomplishment has not even come yet. That's something that I hope to see in 15 or 18 or 20 or even 30 years. Seeing my baby with a life full of Jesus. I think that will be our greatest accomplishment. And church, I think that's how we need to define our accomplishments in our lives. Is, are we doing the things to bring people closer to Jesus? You know, as we think about it tonight, we're going to mess this thing up. We're not going to be the best parents that we can be day in and day out. We're not going to be the best Christians that we can be day in and day out. But I think there lies the beauty, which is the cross. Knowing that we can continually go back to that cross, making sure that we're living our lives in a manner that is well-pleasing to Him. Because on that day of judgment, we want to make sure that we've lived a life that's full of Jesus. Tonight, I know that there's somebody here, I'm sure, that has not yet named the name of Jesus. Best decision I ever made standing in this baptistry some 15 years ago on a Saturday afternoon after we had got done fishing. Changed my life forever. I would encourage you to make that decision tonight. But if we have already become a Christian and we might be living our lives in a way that God's not going to be happy about, in a way that is not full of Jesus, in a way that people don't see Jesus in us, that is also the beauty of the cross. We can come back to that, and we can walk out of these doors sinless and blameless as the day that we came out of that water and gave a baptism. If we can help you in any way, we pray that you come as we stand as we sing.